Hello everyone, it's Paige here, and I will be reviewing the Black Death game. So, the Black Death is a dark, multiplayer survival game set during a plague-ridden medieval era. It was released for early access in April 2016 with the promise of delivering a gritty, realistic survival experience exactly like those who struggled during this period of history. With the central area being based directly on 14th century Western Europe, the game boasts an 8-kilometer square world to explore. You can explore, you can thrive, or you can die, which happens very often. The fact that the developers boasted the realistic experience is what brought me to study this game and look at it from the perspective of historical accuracy or historical reconstruction. I'm taking this analysis from the idea of the medieval ages as it was, or as scholars believed it was. My initial impression went from skeptical to highly immersed very quickly, with the investment in your character being quite high due to no respawns after your death. With health, thirst, hunger, and disease bars all ticking down slowly until your ultimate demise, the struggle to survive is very real, and it's always on your mind to make sure that your character is cared for. The idea of hard work is also apparent throughout this game, as it can be extremely grindy at times just to provide what you need to survive. This was probably what it was like during those times, adding an element of meta immersion to this gameplay. The specific medieval themes are, of course, this setting being during the Black Plague, and the immaculate detail of the cities and towns that you encounter throughout your game. The world really does feel like you've been put into a time machine and are walking the streets of medieval Europe. This walkthrough that I'll be doing will look at the architecture and visuals of the game and define how they are medieval and why this concept works so well with a survival game. In this game, you need to start out as a beggar, and you can slowly, with skill points, work your way up to becoming a peasant and beyond. So, from our character tree here, you can see that we can join three different branches of society. You can be of the first estate, such as the monk, the second estate, such as the knights, the militia, and the third estate is represented by the peasant, the smith, and the merchant. These are obviously going to take a few hours of work before we can get up to those higher levels of play. So most of this will be represented by the beggar. A lot of this gameplay, I wasn't able to get up to the merchant, or the peasant. So a lot of this is from the beggar's perspective. So just take that into account when viewing the imagery. You can rename your character, and there's a little cool snippet about what the beggar is. Essentially, you're living in extreme poverty, and the only way to survive is by begging for your life. And this kind of works, but not really because there's not many players, so you can't really get money by begging. So you must forage and find things to make money. Here we are in our first entry into the game. You find yourself at a shoreline and you need to gather your bearings. Straight off the bat, it becomes clear that gathering plays a huge role in this game, and virtually all the materials that you need to craft or stay alive can be found in the open world. As you can see, I'm searching around and I'm looking inside. You'll see some crates I'll look into, on the ground, all over the place for these sort of materials that will help you survive. You can also use them not only to survive the night, such as making a fire and cooking food, but trading with merchants for gold. To add to the realism, you also need to keep an eye on your bag weight, because just like in reality, you can't carry too much without being overburdened and forced to drop or consume an item. The standard types of materials that you'll find and interact with are cotton, wood, sticks, stones, herbs, and fruit and veggies. The wood and sticks are particularly medieval, as these were vital for building any sort of structures and keeping important fires going. However, most of the clothing in the medieval times would have been wool, and that's not something that I've been able to find in this game so far. I haven't been able to shear a sheep or anything like that. I've just been able to gather cotton, so I think that's a little bit less medieval. As you see here, we have a lot of structures that are made of wood, such as the boat, the dock, the really cool fires that are burning. There's no lights, obviously, so fire pits would have been used. Up here you see a merchant. You can go to him and sell anything you would like to. I don't do that in this playthrough. So I'm just trying to look for shelter. It says that it's nighttime, so I need to find shelter. These are, this is our crafting panel, so you can make tools, weapons, medical supplies, all with things that you can find. And here I can make a stick club with a stick that I found. All these things are really kind of easily found, and in different areas of the open world, you can find more of a certain material, which makes sense. Here's our skill panel. So the idea is you want to be building up your skills as you go through gathering different materials and surviving the night. Surviving the night gives you a huge bonus. And with those skill points, you can add them into the skill tree and eventually fill it out to go up and become a peasant and, you know, move up in the world. So because it's getting nighttime, we're probably gonna cut off this segment and look at another part of the city. The sun was starting to come up and I decided to venture to the capital city of Ravensreach. So here we are just at the entryway. The inspiration for this castle really definitely seems quite Norman. It has moat and bailey style to it with the wood protection. However, there isn't a true moat, but there is, as you'll see, quite a defense in front of the castle. There's also signs of a struggle, that there was perhaps a battle that took place here in the past from the burned houses. These pretty cool wooden protection kind of works to guide any attackers into the entryway and allows for even more protection of this castle. Here we are in the theater district. I'm going to be jumping around a little bit to show you specific areas. So right off the bat, we see the cobblestone streets and this very wide area for people to come meet in. This is actually a little bit unrealistic. In the medieval times, there would not be streets this wide. Often they were quite in close quarters. Having this really wide area is quite uncommon and would be found in medieval London perhaps, but maybe not in one of these areas. So this would be the entertainment and announcement stage. People would come from all the neighboring parishes. They'd travel quite far to come and see any shows coming through. This area would be mostly for the higher socioeconomic classes, those of the fighting estate, and potentially some wealthy merchants would be living in this area. And the next thing we're going to look at is the cathedral in the middle of this square. So these signs kind of point you in the direction because there's no map, so you need to use your signposts to know where you are and orient yourself. So this cathedral or church is extremely medieval. It has the stone ashlar facing and the high archways. And Catholicism and the Catholic Church held much power and influence over Europe during the Middle Ages, so I wanted to see how they depicted it in this game. So we have the pews that are made of wood, which is how they would have been. And although there isn't any, priest in here, I guess service isn't on right now, there also isn't that front stand that is typically found, which I don't think is accurate. I'm sure there would be a lot of ornate things happening up front there, but however, we don't have that in this church. As we leave the church, we run into a Templar knight. I'm here to protect the innocent and the divine. Oh, great. Thanks. So, I mean, there is definitely divinity and the idea of Christ in this game. So we run into a father who says, "The light is upon us. How are you, my child?" And I open to see what I can buy from him. So he sells the plague cure, which is extremely medieval in its context because the monks were the people who would be caring for those in sickness. So a lot of them were sought out by those suffering from the plague for their cures, for their blessings to be healed. So I really like how they made the only people in the game that can actually heal as the monks. We continue on and check out the merchant square with a variety of stalls and merchants with different wares for sale. This guy I approached to sell some of my goods in my bag as I was getting quite heavy. And I saw that he had some cool stuff like the bread roll, the carrot, the parsnip, things that would have been traditionally cooked and found during the medieval times. As we continue to venture around, we reach a blacksmith sign and we decide to go check it out. So down this way, we see a well, the central well that we can gather from, and we got some common water, which is awesome because we always die of thirst. And we see our blacksmith man working along with his anvil.
I craft everything myself.
We can't really interact with him, but we can use the anvil if we wish. And we also find this really creepy guy. He probably is a peasant, slowly starving, but it's very interesting. So as you can see, this city has a couple different areas, and we're going to continue looking around at all of them. Now we're going to look at the graveyard. In this area, we see the stables to our left with some hay, and to our right here, we see the stocks, which you can use if you want, which is kind of funny. You can just pop yourself in there. And we search around here a little bit and see if there's anything else we can, find or use, and there doesn't appear to be. So down this way, we have the graveyard, which are extremely medieval as they don't have any headstones, which nobody had back in those days. And they were unmarked graves. Most people didn't have the money to even have a grave that was marked. This was probably somebody of a bit of status because they actually had stones and a marking for their graves. They weren't just thrown into a pile as we see throughout this game. This next part was kind of a treat because I didn't expect it to be in the game. But as you see here, there's some practice dummies set up made out of cloth. And welcome to the arena. So the arena would be used for tournaments in the Middle Ages, and especially in the High Middle Ages, there would be knights that would come together for melee or jousting fights. It was really cool that they added this into the game. It really definitely showed that the wealth of this area exists and that, it would have been cool if there was something happening, but it's just cool that it's in the game regardless. And as you can see up top, that's where the royalty would sit. And if you were of any sort of status, as well as if you had the money to, dress up and go to one of these things, you would be able to go. This is the other entrance to Raven's Reach, and you initially see a criminal hanging from the gallows to warn those against misbehaving. We come to the initial curtain wall with 2 towers surrounding a bailey area where animals would be grazed and protected. And then you arrive at the inner gatehouse and inner wall with watchtowers set up to carefully check out those visitors entering the city. We see the battlements complete with the portcullis ahead, and it really is quite an intimidating entrance for those coming to visit. Then we reach this entry street where many merchants would set up shop, and the most elite merchants, knights, and noblemen would have their homes. We also see the map here, so you can navigate where you are in the city and see any bulletins that might have been posted. Not sure how realistic that is. Then we travel down the street, passing the Tavern for Travelers, the Butcher's Row, and Smith Street before arriving at the Merchant District with the cathedral. There's also a portcullis that separates the low end of the city from the higher end of the city. Up here to our right, we see the start of the castle of the Queen's Keep. Not able to be accessed by a lowly beggar like myself, with a firm portcullis separating her from the rabble below. The most unrealistic element of this city is the lack of busyness. The medieval merchant area of a castle would be teeming with activity, people shouting to sell ribs of beef and many a pie, and children with no shoes asking if you need lodging for the night. People would be carrying animals, and there'd be tons more noise. This place is barren, and it makes it seem far from the real experience of a medieval city. The final area we'll be looking at in Raven's Reach is that of the tavern. So I was looking online for some information on medieval taverns, and I found a pretty interesting description. So taverns, or more accurately, alehouses, served mostly the same purpose that they serve today. It was a place where you could buy drink and low quality food with other men. It was nearly exclusively men, and the amount of filth on the floors would be noticeable, and all sorts of horse crap and mud would be all over the place. Um, it would sell cheap ale and offer good company to men of the city. And in this one specifically, it was interesting that a friar was serving. I don't think that was necessarily how it was. So I think that's a little bit inaccurate, and I'm not sure it would be as beautiful and decorated as it is in this. Now we will leave Raven's Reach and head to Farley Citadel, where we will examine the structures in this new city. On my way to the Farley Castle, I came across this large area of farmable land, which would have been tended to by the peasants. This land would belong to a neighboring manor and lord, and the peasants would be in charge of harvesting and tending the crops for his fortune. They would be given a small plot of land for a rental price to grow their own food. You also see the homes of the peasants that they would build themselves from the material they were permitted to use from the forests of the lord, often for a small fee. The accuracy of having animals run free is actually very true, as animals were able to run over the crops and ruin them, as they were often kept in the same sort of wide enclosure. And you see here some awesome gameplay of me killing some wild animals with a stick. It's pretty hilarious. As we see from the signpost, we are approaching Farley. So here we are, and we've arrived at Farley Castle. As we travel towards the bridge of this Edwardian moat and bailey style castle, we have some very square towers and stone ramparts welcoming us. The entrance was always the most vulnerable point in a castle, so it received a lot of attention to its defensive design, and we definitely see that here with the double entrance. If one person or if an army got through the first entrance, they would have the second entrance and arrow fire coming down on them from every angle, from the arrow slits and the ramparts. So you would be pretty screwed if you got through the first little bit. So here we are in the main city. This castle was built with ashlar stone and appears quite remarkable against the barren landscape surrounding it. It was built on top of a high hill, as we saw, and it clearly has highly defensive elements to it. So the friar that I just spotted there right behind me, an interesting note about the friar is they're similar to monks. However, monks have devoted themselves to staying within the monasteries, and friars were free to travel and spread the word of God. So this makes sense that the friar would be in this sort of city area. It appears this game is clearly not finished. It is in early access. I wish there was a little more richness to show within these walls, especially with the housing and maybe the way that people might have been living. Here we have a few beds, so probably the servants' quarters or the army quarters where the militia and the not knights, but the fighters would stay. But most likely the servants, as they're quite simple. And it's really quite beautiful. You see the beautiful watchtowers with abilities to shoot out of, and we can't actually get into the castle keep area. There is a wall separating us from that, which makes sense. You wouldn't want, any sort of peasants going through. As you see, I attempt to go through the door where the king might, make some speeches here, come out and address the crowd. But you can't unlock it, and the guard does not help with that at all. But this might be a place where they come out and address the people. This is a weaponsmith that sells some rare iron, which would be available at that time, but only to the wealthy and the fighters. So inside here, we might expect this to be a sort of inn. It's not also finished. Pigs. So there were many wild pigs back in the medieval times, and they were often a big problem. So it makes sense that they would be in the city. Here we are, and it looks like a practice grounds for archers. Clearly this is very archery-based bowman weaponry. This might be where some nobles or the sergeants would sit and watch and critique those practicing. Again, there's a military guard who's not very helpful. And this seems to be the back exit towards the north. Overall, this is a stunning castle, stunning structure. It clearly shows that there's wealth here, and the materials used to build this are very medieval, and I definitely get the sense that I'm running around a medieval town, except for obviously the part that there's not many people. So if this was populated, it would be way more medieval. Here we have a loom to help with sewing any sort of cotton that you might find. And here we find a house that I'm really not sure what the purpose is. There are some dead bodies hidden under there. I guess it is during the plague, so you kind of have to deal with it how you would, but I don't believe they would keep bodies in houses. I hope not. They would try and get them away from the city so that the contagion wouldn't spread. This appears to be the stables. Again, no horses. There would be many horses there for the night as people would travel to visit. There doesn't appear to be any sort of church, which I'm very surprised. There pretty much is always a church in a medieval keep like this, so I think that is not very realistic. And here we have a hall where people would spend their time eating and drinking if once their day was done. And here we have a merchant that you can buy and sell things from if you so wish. And the pig still roaming. So overall, Farley is a beautiful place. It looks like it has a lot of wealth to it, and it's clearly a very defensive structure. It is up against quite a barren landscape around it, so it makes sense it would be defensive. So we'll go on and visit another area and check that out. So we went to the north, and we've entered a place called Svalberg, which is a northern fortress keep. What I soon realized was that this keep was in the midst of being raided by bandits. So this was one of the more intense scenes that I had when I was playing this game. There is quite a few medieval themes as we run through here, but it is mostly me running for my life. So we see a hanged person. It's probably from the raiders. We see this house on fire, everything being burned, arrows in the walls. So there was clearly a battle that took place here, and I'm just witnessing the remnants. Every single one of these bandits is trying to kill me. It's a miracle that I didn't die through that. So my main reason for heading north was I wanted to go to Ironhold, which you see on the far right side in the mountains, and that's where I'm headed now. However, it's quite funny, I managed to get there in a way that you weren't meant to do so in the game, and I ended up kind of breaking the game, as you see here. I went too high on the map, and I was able to wall jump my way, and it's actually a really cool view of Ironhold. However, obviously, we're not meant to be up here, but I just wanted to show you kind of the upper view that I was able to have of this really cool area. As we finally arrive at Ironhold using the correct way, encounter a very intimidating entryway that rises up to meet us, with huge square battlements and thick ramparts. There is a heavy metal portcullis and buttress outside the gatehouse offering extreme protection, likely from the outside bandits that we encountered that are raiding neighboring keeps. As we enter the keep, we feel an ominous looming as the main house is set much higher than you are. Anyone, guest or vigilante, or anyone attacking would feel extremely intimidated and small by the sloping of the wooden clad hill that you see here. So we're heading into the main house now to check out what's inside. And we come across this great hall. So this hall would be for feasts, for guests, and you see at the front where the Lord would stay. There's some banners hanging up there to represent the house. There's some books that would be treasured and obviously show the wealth of the area. And we head upstairs and we see probably probably not the servants' quarters, but somebody maybe a little bit higher up than servants. And here, maybe the warriors would be sleeping. So I take a seat and I see what the view is, but really there's nothing really decorating it. There's no people around, but I think this would probably be where the warriors would sleep, the guards and that kind of thing. So again, we see the Great Hall. It's really quite nice. And we go to check up at the front to see if there's any utensils or anything. The red must represent their house, so that's why it's hanging all over. And now we're just venturing across that wooden bridge that we saw from the entrance of the keep. Gives a good idea of the scope of this. And here we have the archer's ramparts. So these arrow holes would be used to snipe people from afar and prevent attackers from getting any closer. The keep is really quite beautiful. This is my favorite castle or keep in the entire game. So down here is likely where the servants would be working. They would have their animals to tend to. As we see here, there's stables for sure for horses or cows or anything like that. And down here you might have houses that belong to peasant families, or even somebody a bit wealthier that would actually, because as we saw in there, it's actually a painting that was in there, so maybe someone quite wealthy. And up here we have the work area where the blacksmith and the tanner would be working to provide goods for sale and goods for the armies. And here we have the tanner. But really, this is a very beautiful northern keep. The peasant, I think the plague has me, stay away. Oh, bless you. So, I mean, there's always that religious connotation. They haven't obviously changed from Christianity going north, so that's a little bit inaccurate because I know there was more unrest against Christianity in the north. So ultimately, that's Ironhold, and it's really a stunning, stunning keep, and it's really, really cool. So I hope you enjoy, and we're moving on to the next area. So here we are coming up to Bywick, which is a Middle Ages village that the peasants would be working for their lord. It is a much more modest area than the ones that we've been seeing. It's made entirely of wood and things that they would find around this local area. They're very focused on taking care of animals and plowing the fields and just providing what they can to survive. So Bywick would be a village for farming, and the manor lord would not live here. This would be where the peasants would live and tend to his land. So all these areas are sectioned off, and a lot of these would probably be allocated to the peasants themselves to grow as much food as they could for themselves. They would pay a rent to have this land. Here's a guard on duty, and I'd like to take note of the thatched roofs and the wooden structures, because this is definitely how it would have been in the medieval times. So here we have a crafting station, and we have a gentleman here who is the tanner. So he's the blacksmith slash tanner. So here he has some common iron swords, just kind of low quality things that he would have been able to find the ore to smith them locally. And here's just a couple other people in the town, other NPCs. So I'm just searching some crates, trying to find some goods. There's a utility oven here, which people might sit around and, you know, if they need to cook something, or if the blacksmith was smelting something, they would use that. And here we are at the tavern. It is completely run down and not very usable. However, it looks like it might have been a good tavern. There's a campfire here as well. So this is pretty abandoned, Bywick. Maybe it's because of the plague and many people died and they don't have anyone to run it, but it's definitely your typical country manor that I wanted to show you. On my way to the next area, I ran into a plagued peasant, and I wanted to show you some of this awesome combat that happens in the game, and I died again, as per usual. It's really hard to survive against these guys. For our final destination in this playthrough, I want to bring you to St. John's Monastery. So we took kind of a weird route into it. There's a hole in the wall, and I found it running away from some bandits, and I find myself in this massive cellar full of kegs. And I did some research, and I realized that these kegs could be one of two things. They could be wine, or they could be ale. It really kind of depends. So Belgian monasteries did make ales, and wine is a key part of religious ceremonies. However, I'm not sure why they would need that many. So it is a little bit up to debate, historical debate of which one that is. I don't think they're in Belgium. So yeah, I guess it must be wine. So here's a hall that the monks would be eating and you know, communing in after prayer. You have the beautiful candles up above, the gorgeous stone interior, and the very opulent light fixtures. And in the center, we have an open area and a well. And we run into a monk, the first monk of the game. He says, "Bless you, child," and he has food and mead. Okay, so perhaps it's mead. inside those kegs downstairs.
Very well.
What a sight for sore eyes. I am extremely in need of food and thirsty, so this is great. And now we find ourselves at the front of the monastery. We were in the back where the monks would have lived, but this is the monastery where they would spend their time in prayer. So it really is one of the more beautiful structures in this game. You have the beautiful high archways, the long carpet heading to the altar, the wooden pews, which are very large, as people would come from all around to this monastery. We have the monks that are offering things for sale. They have their books, water, mead, and other trinkets and things that they would have for sale. Here we have an urn of sorts that could hold holy water for ceremonies. The carpet, very beautiful. And here at the front, we have very high ceilings, beautiful A-frame ceilings. This is an extremely big undertaking to build in the medieval times. But these would exist with the stained glass windows up above and the beautiful tapestry hanging behind. We have our monk again with this small plague cure, which of course is historically accurate, as I spoke of before. I can't afford it, it's extremely expensive. And back here we have the altar. So this appears unfinished, but if you look over there, you see the center of the courtyard. And of course the altar where they would preach from and pray. And we can see the forest out there. So ultimately this is a stunning, stunning area with a beautiful layout, and I'm very happy I could share it with you. So that's it for my review. And I just want to sum a few things up before we conclude. The reason this works so well as a survival game is that you are truly scared for your life and you really care about your character. You're trying every way possible to stay alive and visit the next town or the next city so that you can learn more about the area that you're living in. I'd say I'm pretty good at video games, and the longest I was able to survive was 9 days. It really showed me how unequipped I would have been to survive in these darker times of history, while contrasted heavily with the rich and grand fortresses and keeps that you play through during this game. Ultimately, this is a really interesting and entertaining period game that's well worth the $20 if you're interested in medieval history. So thank you so much and have a good one.